So welcome everybody. Like I said, my name is Sue Shardlow. I am one of the directors of Women Who Code London. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. I'm aware that you're giving up your precious time to do this, regardless of the time of day it is where you are, but please jump into the chat, let us know where you're dialing in from and what time it is there. We have a number of folks here in the UK, Oxford, Bath, West Yorkshire, not just in London. We've also got some folks in the US, South Carolina, California. Raymond himself is in Louisiana. So yeah, it's really good to see you. We've also got somebody in Canada, which is really exciting. So we've got Raymond Camden talking to us tonight and giving us an intro to Vue.js. But before I introduce him, I'm just going to give you a little backgrounder to Women Who Code. So Women Who Code is actually a global organisation. In case you didn't know, we have about 230,000 members and we have networks in 70 cities in 20 countries. However, we do have members in more than 20 countries. It's more like 100 because some cities don't have a network. So folks just join the one that's nearest to them. And obviously all our events are digital now. So people are joining from all over the world. If you want to find out where your nearest network is, visit the URL at the bottom of this page. Or if you're struggling with that, feel free to hit me up and I will help you. I'll put my contact details up shortly. So Women Who Code's mission is inspiring women to excel in technology careers. Our vision is a world where women are representative as technical executive, founders, VCs, board members, and software engineers. We're very aware that there are still issues with attracting women into technology and also retaining them in the industry. So what we like to do at Women Who Code is celebrate the achievements of our members. If you go to womenwhocode.com/applaud her, you can submit a success that you've had, whether it's a new job or a promotion or anything like that. You've started volunteering or you've started teaching folks or you've done a talk. Go to that page, have a read of what other people have been doing and also submit your own. I highly encourage you to do that. If you are looking to sharpen up your tech skills, we have a number of coding resources on the Women Who Code website at /resources. These are suitable from everyone from beginner to intermediate to advanced level. So hopefully you can find something on there which will help you, but I highly encourage you to go and check that out. We do have a code of conduct, which I will mention to you now. You can read it at womenwhocode.com/code of conduct. The short version is if you experience any harassment or witness any, then please do report that either via that webpage or reach out to me directly. I will give you my contact details. And also please just treat everybody with respect, treat everybody the way you think that they would like to be treated, and then we should all be okay. So these are the contact details for me and Raymond. I will give Raymond a proper intro in a second. Just putting these up here in case anybody wanted to take a quick screen grab. I will also post them in the chat later and I'm sure Raymond has them on his slides, but feel free to reach out to us. Feel free to reach out to Raymond if you want to know anything about Vue. You can ask me, but probably better to ask Raymond, to be honest with you. If you want any help with Women Who Code matters, please feel free to contact me. And also if you want to talk at one of our events, I would encourage that. My email address is there, so please get in touch with me and let me know what you would like to talk about. So what we have got, before I introduce Raymond, I thought we could do a fun, I promise you it is fun, a fun little quiz. So here we go, hopefully this is gonna work. Okay, right, so you should now be able to see a URL and a code. So if you good folks would all go to that URL and enter the code. I'll just give you a second to do that. Then you should be able to participate in the quiz. It's only 2 questions and they're not, well, it's like our general knowledge. They're easy if you know them. So hopefully all you folks who want to join in are there. So the first question is, Raymond Camden lives in Lafayette, Louisiana. Which of these cities is also in Louisiana? Raymond, you can take part in this if you want to. Oh, this is cool. Do they have palm trees in Louisiana? I don't know. It's a bit of a tough one, isn't it? This is cool. 23 people, 24. New Orleans is in the lead here. Louisville. Okay. The correct answer is New Orleans. Louisville, convincing. Louisiana, Louisville. Yeah, I see what you did there. I also see what I did there. But Louisville is more widely known to be a big city in Kentucky. Little Rock is in neighboring Arkansas. But nice try, everybody. Well done. Second question, true or false? Camden is a district within London. How much do you know about London? How much do you know about Camden? How much do you know about Raymond Camden? You will know a lot more by the end of this talk. I did not fool anybody with that question. That was not a very good trick question, was it? You folks already know this. It's quite a famous place in London. Amy Winehouse used to live there, and it is a very popular place for tourists. So if you have been to London, likely you have been to Camden. So well done, everybody. Okay, so enough of the history and the background and the quizzes and the tests. Now you can sit back and relax and listen to Raymond Camden tell you all about Vue.js. Now, Raymond loves teaching people. He has been coding for the best part of 2 decades, and he has authored a number of books about web development. He currently works as a lead developer evangelist for Here Technologies, helping developers to unlock the power of their location data. He's previously worked for a number of big names like IBM, Adobe, and American Express. And like I said, he is based in Lafayette, Louisiana. I am really pleased that when I asked Raymond to speak with us tonight, he said yes straight away. He and I have known each other for a couple of years, and I just think he's awesome. He really knows his stuff. So I'm really pleased that he's here to give this talk for us. I have also seen this talk before, and I've personally found it really accessible. You will get the most out of this if you are experienced a little bit with HTML and JavaScript. But yes, welcome to Women Who Code London, Raymond.
Thank you. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right, let me share my screen. Oh, and first off, thank you for that awesome introduction. Thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be speaking here, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're very welcome. It's our pleasure. Thank you.
Share. All right. Y'all can see my slide okay?
We can, yes. And I forgot to say that I will be posting some links to the demos in the chat as well. So if anyone wants to follow along.
Have you hit record?
I have hit record. Thanks for reminding me.
Just making sure. All right. So let me make sure I have my mouse. Come on. There we go. All right. So I will skip the introduction because Suze did a great job. I will kind of fast forward to resharing my Twitter handle, which is Raymond Camden. My DMs are open. I love to get questions. So if you have any question about this, if you have any question about web development, if you have any question about Star Wars or anything like that, please feel free to ask me. You won't be bothering me. I can respond when I can. And a lot of times I turn questions into blog posts. So you will help me, share knowledge with other people as well. This entire slide deck and the demos are up on GitHub at cfjedimaster/vue-prezo. And I exported a PDF copy of the PowerPoint as well. So don't worry if you don't have PowerPoint. Most of the demos are going to be on CodePen, but I definitely have some examples from the repo as well that I will be showing. So let's start by talking about why Vue. And I think even before we talk about why Vue, I think it's absolutely worthwhile to talk about why you would use any JavaScript framework, because it should not be assumed that you need one, right? Because every bit of code that you add to your page makes your page a little bit slower, makes your client's browsers have to work a little bit harder. So, I absolutely love Vue. If I could somehow manage my children with Vue.js, I would do that. But I still try and, I try to think before I start using Vue, like, can I just do this with a bit of vanilla JavaScript? Do I really need a framework. So while I absolutely love Vue and I think it's the best framework in the world out there, keep in mind that it's not something that you're going to need for every single use case out there. But if you have figured out that you're building something that's a bit complex, it's more than like 5 lines of JavaScript, it's something where there's going to be complexity, it's going to take a couple weeks, and it's going to kind of gradually grow, and you have figured out that, yeah, you do want a framework to kind of help you along, why would you pick Vue.js? It's certainly not the most popular one out there. For a long time, that was AngularJS, and now it's React. So why would you pick Vue? So what is going to follow is 100% my personal feelings on why Vue.js rocks. So feel free to not agree with me, that's all right. So number one, I find Vue to be incredibly simple. You know, when I look at something like React, you know, every time I've tried to learn it, it seems complex. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying it, to me, React wasn't as approachable as Vue.js was. I worked on a platform for a long time called Cold Fusion. This was a server-side platform. It was also pretty easy to use. And one thing I found out is that that community was filled with people who were non-traditional computer science people. They were English, they were poli-sci majors, you know, they were definitely, you know, again, non-traditional programmers. And Cold Fusion worked for them, even though they didn't have the comp sci background. I find Vue.js kind of has a similar feeling to it, that it's okay if you're if you came from a different background and you don't know the most optimized sorting algorithm out there. You know, essentially the JavaScript interview gotcha questions. If you don't know those, like me, I definitely don't know those. Vue.js feels very easy to use and easy to pick up to me. Also, it has no build process. Now, I'm not against the build process. I understand what a build process does and what, you know, how it helps you get things done. But when I think about like AngularJS, I spent a long time working with AngularJS. I never casually used AngularJS. Why? Because you have to scaffold an application. You get 400 files, and you know, so it's. I have 7 kids. My wife has 1 from her past marriage. Together we have 8 kids. You don't casually do anything when you have that many kids. Every single thing you do is a process. Nothing wrong with that at all. I'm definitely not counting the days left until my youngest child moves out. But you know, it's a process. And I liked Angular, but it felt like, oh, I have this weird idea for a really stupid demo that I want to blog about that no one's going to read. Like, I would never do that with Angular because it felt like I had to do a lot of meta stuff to do that. Vue, with it not needing a build process, I found myself playing with it so much when I was learning. And it was just, to me, it just helped me learn it more. And what's awesome about all of that, everything I just said, you know, yes, and there is a build process for when you want to build an application. So I don't know about y'all, but it feels like the last 10 years, when people talk about JavaScript, they're talking about single page applications, talking about building, you know, 1,000 lines of code to build a completely JavaScript driven thing, you know. And I came from the world of doing a lot of jQuery, of taking a page that was mostly good and just making it more awesome with a bit of JavaScript. Vue supports all of those use cases. So you want to add interactivity to a web page, and that's it. Great, nice and simple. If you want to build a single page application, great, Vue supports that as well. So I feel like, you know, kind of no matter what my particular use case is, Vue supports all those different ways of doing that. And to me, it was just that much more inviting to actually learn and play with the framework. So just some quick metadata about Vue. It was created by Evan You way back in 2014. Remember airplanes, remember conferences way back then. So it's a couple years old. Currently version 2.611, and there's obviously a website at vuejs.org. And you could also go on GitHub if you want to look at the issues and stuff like that. I'll be honest, I use Vue a lot. I've looked at the issues like twice. I think it's just not something I need to do, but I appreciate the fact that I could do that if I wanted to. There is a major version coming soon that you may have heard about. They've been talking about Vue 3.0 for about a year or so now. So I will say this presentation is definitely Vue 2, but I do talk a bit about Vue 3.0, specifically when. It's very soon now. It's a release candidate. In fact, this is probably the last time that I'll talk about Vue 2. I was waiting for the release candidate because, you know, I'm not smart enough to really participate in the building aspect of the next framework. That's for people smarter than me. Now that it's an RC, I want to start preparing my own blog posts and my own education and sharing that with others. So it's approaching, it's pretty soon. I have some details about what's changing in 3 towards the end of this presentation. If you do want to start looking at it immediately, it's also on the Vue.js GitHub organization under Vue-Next. And they do have docs now and a migration guide. So they are really getting close. I think I hear a child walking up, so this could be interesting in a second. So what does Vue do? So I love to take a product, you know, whether it's an open source product or a product by, you know, billion-dollar corporation. I love taking millions of hours of work and digesting it to like 1 or 2 bullet points. That makes the people in marketing very happy. So I'm going to do that with Vue. I'm going to kind of just boil it down to a few things that I think are important. One of that is two-way binding between your DOM and JavaScript. DOM is a fancy way of saying all the crap on your web page. But if you want to have a connection between your input form fields and stuff like that and JavaScript, Vue makes that pretty easy. It also has a template language built in. And template language is too easy, so they call it declarative rendering. But if you've ever worked with something like Handlebars or Jade/Pug, then you've seen these kind of languages that compile into HTML and let you do things in HTML like conditions and looping and things like that. And literally that's it. Now, yes, there's a few more details. Vue does a little bit more than that, but like 95% of what I've built in Vue.js falls into those 2 buckets. So in terms of installation, you can do an npm install if you feel like installing the internet. There's also a CLI that will do a scaffold for you, and I'll show you an example of that later on. Or you can just download it from the site and or copy and paste the script tag. Remember I talked about, you know, easy? So you can probably guess as to the option that I like the most. And this, you know, goes back to when I was learning, knowing that I could just pop open an index.html file and drop a script tag in was very inviting for me. I'll be using the unpackaged CDN for most of my demos. I pretty much set a Visual Studio Code shortcut and then I never touch it again. So that may not be the best CDN for it, but it works. So let's actually talk about writing some code. First thing that you are going to do is identify where you're going to render stuff. Then you'll set up some data, and then you'll render that data, and then you will add events. Now, I think hopefully like all of that should make sense, except for maybe the very first part. And this in particular was something that was a bit weird to me when I first learned Vue.js, because I came into Vue, you know, having a lot of experience with jQuery. And in jQuery, you know, you just drop the jQuery script tag and you can drop multiple script tags. jQuery is fine with that. And then you say, hey, I want to change that list of stuff. I want to change that text. I want to change this image. jQuery lets you do whatever in the heck you want to any part of your DOM at all. It's just, yeah, fine, do whatever you want. That's very freeing, but if you've ever worked on a project with a lot of jQuery code, it can get a little bit messy. You know, like I said, I have seen projects where they literally had the jQuery script hacked like 5 times, and just because, you know, one person worked on it, then somebody else, and just builds and builds and builds. And to its credit, jQuery just kind of rolled along as well as it could. So Vue's a bit different. Before you actually start doing something, you have to tell it, like, I am going to work on this part of the DOM. This is where I'm going to manipulate stuff. Later on, you know, the client comes back to you a few months later and wants to modify that table. I can actually build an entirely separate Vue application and just bind it to that particular part. So what's nice about this is that, you know, if you are working in your code and you don't name your variable very well, like you call it thing, or you call it person or object or whatever, you know, if you fail to follow computer science best practices in terms of naming, because you're human, you don't necessarily have to worry about a second Vue application conflicting with that. So on the slide right there, those two Vue applications can have the exact same methods and variables, and they won't bounce together at all. If you're curious, yes, you can say, I want the entire body tag, or I want, you know, if I'm using Bootstrap, for example, and it has divs everywhere, I could take those parent divs and say, yeah, Vue, you have control over all of that. And then I could do like jQuery and just go crazy and write stuff out. So the next set of examples, these are all on CodePen. If you've never used CodePen before, it lets you write code and kind of see it in real time. It's a great way to share code. Everything that I'm showing here, you can copy and paste this link. You can go in my demo and you can actually modify the code and play with it. You won't be breaking mine. It'll be your own copy, but it's a great way to play with it. So the very first thing that I will do is somewhere in my DOM, I'll figure out where I'm going to work. So I'll take a div, I'll give it a particular ID so I can address that later. I will then write a bit of code, and I will create a new Vue application. First parameter I'll pass to it is an EL property, which is short for element, which is basically where I want to work. And then I will define some data. This will work. This is a Vue application, but it does absolutely nothing. It runs very fast, but it does absolutely nothing. If I actually want to start working with this, then what I start doing is start using that template language I was talking about. And again, if you've ever worked with handlebars or liquid, this should look pretty familiar, where I've used a particular character, a bracket, bracket, and close bracket, bracket. Vue is going to look at that HTML. It's going to see those brackets, and it's going to replace name with the value that's in data. Same for age. So if we look at this real quick, and I got too many windows, I apologize. All right, this is my CodePen for the first demo. You can see on the slide deck, I think I said 44, so I've been talking about Vue for a while. But as I change my age, and I get to my more formal name, it's updating. And so far, this is not necessarily rocket science, but when I look at this, the first thing that comes to mind is, if I am a HTML developer and I don't know JavaScript at all, I could work with somebody who knows JavaScript. And if I know HTML, like this, I feel like I could handle. I could let the JavaScript person handle all the Vue.js stuff, and then I work on my HTML side and do my CSS and all the pretty and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So that's pretty simple. It's just replacing variables based on the data in the application. If you want to start adding a bit of logic, Vue adds a set of attributes that we can use in HTML tags. They will typically start with v-, and in this case, you're seeing an example of a simple condition, v-if. It will look at the data, and if that value is true, then that will be output in HTML. On the second example, you can also see a v-else, and if you want to, you can do a v-else if. So to be clear, we're not really talking about programming in HTML. If you have 20 v-elses in there or v-else ifs, then you may have made a mistake somewhere. But you know, Vue allows that. And again, like I like the fact that Vue appreciates that I'm human and may not always code optimally. That's going to be the second demo. I have, make this a little bit over. So I have my v-else there. And if I were to drink a magical potion and be 4 again, then I wouldn't feel so bad getting so many Star Wars toys. You can see that the HTML changed kind of automatically. And again, like I keep imagining this person who knows HTML, doesn't know JavaScript. And I feel like I could teach that person these basic conditions and they could design this HTML. without having to know about code. Next thing that we can do with that template language would be simple looping. That's going to be with v-4, and I'm going to iterate over either an object or an array. Typically, it's going to be an array. When I do thing in things, I'm basically saying I want you to iterate over the things array, and for every part of that array, I want you to copy the value into a thing called thing. I'm doing it here in an unordered list, but I could loop over a paragraph, over a div, over a span, over an image, whatever makes sense. This is in the third demo. And you can see I like cats, Star Wars, and beer. And if I just add some more data, like more beer and more cats, definitely like more cats, and Star Trek as well, then it just works. And again, pretty minimal in terms of the code that I've had to work. In fact, really, I haven't done any logic in JavaScript outside of setting a variable. Something else I'll point out, all of these first sets of Vue demos, all this data is hard-coded. You can absolutely work with data that's loaded via Ajax. And I'll be showing an example of that pretty soon, actually. So I've shown like most of already some of the stuff that you can do on the HTML side. I talked about two-way data binding, and that's typically how then you work with form fields. So I don't know if you could see the messages from the meeting room, but it's actually blocking my slide here. The way that you do that in Vue is with a v-model form field, a v-model attribute. This essentially creates a connection between your form field and your Vue data. And it just plain works in every single form field out there. So if you've ever done anything in jQuery where you have a dropdown and you want to say when the dropdown changes, I want to know that particular value, or if I want to add dropdown options, it's possible, but it's a bit of work. Vue makes this incredibly simple. I have a blog post that you can go to where I went to the Moz Dev Network webpage on form fields. I copied every single type available, like input type equals color, input type equals tel, and I built Vue.js demos just showing how the V model acts with that particular form field. I will keep it a little bit simpler for this presentation. This is one example where I have a text field and I literally just do v-model. And what that means is look at my Vue.js data, look for a field called name, and connect this form field with that JavaScript data. So if we go into the fourth demo, I have a text field, I have a select field, and in both of those, I literally just used the V model. I also have a input type equals radio. Don't look too closely at this. I'll be talking about that in a little bit, but I wanted to show you an example basically of just how easy it is to connect those values. Whereas I change it, JavaScript knows, and I change my name. And if I were to go into my data directly and say, is Ray cool? I think I'm cool. My kids don't think I'm cool, but what do they know? They're kids. But that select field just updated like that. So again, not something that's impossible in jQuery, but you have to go and get all the options and loop over and see where it's equal, then set the selected value. And in Vue.js, it's just v-model and done. Really, really like that. So in terms of events, this will be in a new block in the Vue application. You can see I have it on screen there. It's in a methods block. And every event that I want to connect to a particular function, I will put it within that methods block. To define an event, I go to my DOM and I do v-on the event name, and Vue supports all the supported events out there, click, tap, etc. And I just give it the name. So if we look at this demo, and I stole this from the docs because it was nice and simple, so it made sense. As I click this, it goes up. Now, this is something that you do a lot of. If you've done some JavaScript development, event connecting like this is something that's pretty common. Vue actually has a shortcut for this to save you all the typing of v-on::. If you do the @ symbol, that is a shortcut for creating that event handler. And as you click, it goes up. Something else I want to point out, the this scope in your event handlers map to your data here. So as you know, JavaScript gets a bit funky when it comes to the this scope and what exactly it means. I would love to explain that to you, but this is why I fail JavaScript interviews. All I know is that Vue makes it simpler for you by just saying, hey, this is your data. Yep, and I said this already. I'll also point out, if you want to do a modifier, you just do dot and then the particular modifier. The best example of that is one you typically do on a form where you want to stop the form from submitting and do JavaScript to do fancy stuff on it. In jQuery, typically that was e.prevent default. But in Vue, I can actually do it in the DOM and just say submit.prevent, and that will handle doing that for me. And again, again, you have the @click option for the shorthand version. So one more thing that you can do in your DOM and in your Vue application is binding data between the attributes. So I kind of showed that with vModel, where I was binding the value of a form field to Vue data. Attribute binding is a bit more direct, where I want to say, this particular value in my DOM for this part of the DOM itself will be bound to a Vue value. The longhand form of that is v-bind, the attribute, and then the value. In this case, something in your Vue data. Again, this is something that's pretty common. So Vue has a shorthand where you just drop the v-bind. Vue will also do a couple of nice things related to CSS. So in the first example where I have a style defined, I've said that I want to bind BG color to Vue data called cur color and font style to text style. Now, what's nice is that Vue can say, okay, so for this DOM, they define two particular style values based on two sets of Vue data. When one changes, Vue will only update that particular part of the style declaration. So it won't cause a complete redraw based on that. Same for class. So if you know Bootstrap, they love to have class equals tab active, and yada, 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 multiple classes. If I use this shorthand in Vue, where I have is active and app status, as those values toggle, Vue is smart enough to modify just that particular part of the class. So I do have a demo on this. And all right, so this is a bit complex. I have a button with an event handler that's going to run change pick. I have an image tag and I'm doing the binding. In this case, I'm binding source. And I'm actually showing an example where you can mix multiple Vue declarations. So I have vbind and vif. My source value is starting off as null. So when this application first loads, this image tag is actually hidden from the DOM. As I click, it's going to iterate across these three pictures. And once that source has a value, then it shows up in the DOM. And I could click again, and it's just going, essentially looping over the array. And again, remember this dot equals the data that I defined up here. So computed properties, this is probably my favorite feature of Vue. And just like I tell my kids randomly once a day that one's my favorite, I have multiple favorite features of Vue. These are essentially virtual properties where I say I want to use a particular property that's based on something else instead. This will be defined in another new part of the Vue application called the computed part. And this works really well when you see like a before and after example. So I have a set of data. I have a set of cats. These are arrays of objects where I have a name and I have a gender. Now I want to show the male cats and the female cats. So I can, and Vue won't complain, I could do a v-for and a v-if where I iterate over the entire array, and for each one, I check the gender property. Now this works just fine. But hopefully, you're getting a bit of a code smell from this. You can see where it's a bit brittle. If for some reason the gender became lowercase, this would break immediately. And this also kind of, puts a bit too much logic in the HTML side. And in fact, if you've used handlebars before, handlebars kind of doesn't allow for stuff like this because it doesn't want you doing this much in HTML. So again, I appreciate that Vue will let me write bad code. This is my Friday, 4:50 p.m. I really want a beer. I want to just be done. This works. Friday, 4 o'clock. Monday morning, I come in and I fix it. And what I do is I use the computed part of the Vue instance and I define logic. I've created two methods here, male cats and female cats. And then I wrote some logic to basically return the data that I want to use in the front end. My HTML is a heck of a lot simpler. If the logic were to change at some point, I wouldn't have to worry about it. And it just plain works. I'll point out, I'm using what I like to call fancy hipster JavaScript with the arrow functions. I did it all in one line. Vue does not require you to be this fancy. If this scares you and you want to do a for loop, that's okay. Don't let anyone tell you that that's not okay. Vue is fine with that. You can write this logic however you want. And to me, I love this. So if the HTML person wrote the code on the left and I actually had male cats and female cats hard-coded, that'd be awesome. If later on I start using an API call and I get the data like for real, the HTML never has to change. It just goes from being fake static data to dynamic data. So I have an example of this, but I won't run it because it literally just does what you expect, but it's on that CodePen collection that you can play with. Vue supports various lifecycle events if you care about them. Essentially, I want to know when Vue is doing stuff. It supports a lot of them, and they're all very precise and very nicely documented. I'll be honest, I basically use two of these, typically the created event. And I do that to say, hey, when the Vue application is started up, I want to run some logic. In this case, I'm hitting the Star Wars API. And by the way, that's the older URL. It's moved to a new URL. The CodePen has a new one. But because I called this created, it's going to run automatically on start. And if we go to that 8th demo, you could see, hold on, 8th demo, you can see it ran. If I were to reload this, you'll see it loads up. And by the way, yes, this was an Ajax-based call. It could have been very slow. I don't have a loading screen or anything like that. Vue.js would absolutely allow me to do that. I don't have error handling because I write perfect code and APIs never fail. But if I wanted to add error handling in here, I absolutely could have something in here that would say API is down or whatever. So again, Vue does not prevent you from doing that. I was just being a bit lazy here. Spoiler, not the first time I'll be lazy. So one more quick tip before we go into a full example. If you want to hide the FUOC, the flash of unstyled content, and I'm seeing that missing parentheses and I'm fighting myself to not exit display mode and fix it real quick. Raymond, you don't have to do that now. It's okay, you can wait. If you want to avoid that FUOC, you can add a bit of HTML, in this case v-cloak, and then a style declaration to hide it. And all that is this. So I go into my style tag or my CSS file. I define v-cloak as display none, and then I add it to my div. When Vue.js loads, it will remove that v-cloak automatically for you. I did not do that on most of my CodePens because they were pretty simple, but most of my fuller demos should have that. So I have a set of examples, and I know I got about 30-ish minutes left. No, I have till 2 p.m. I have a bit more time, so I'll show some of this code. But very first thing I want to show is form validation. I started working on the web around 93 or so, 94 maybe. And I began my web career writing Perl CGI scripts to validate form fields. That's why, remember 10 years ago when HTML5 was the rage? Anyone remember HTML5 being a really big deal? And you would go see an HTML5 presentation and you would see one thing every time. You would see canvas. because Canvas let you draw pretty pictures and all that. And yeah, okay, I get it. It's pretty. But I still remember when I was doing my own research, I was like, oh, they added more form fields? I build forms every single day. I've been doing forms since day one. Why are people raving about this? I apologize. That's the only soapbox I'll get on today until the next one. But yeah, so form validation in Vue.js, we all kind of know how it works. I built the demo where I hit the submit button, I report on top, and there's actually some more examples of this. Let me show you this running, and then I'll show the code behind it. This is my simple form. I only have 3 fields, 2 are required, and I can see that when I hit submit. I render my error. And so, by the way, this is not Vue.js forcing me to render on top. If I wanted to render it next to the form field, I could do that as well. And as I type stuff in and hit submit, it updates again. If I wanted automatic feedback, like as I tabbed out of a form field, I could do that. I find those forms kind of aggressive. It's like, oh my God, I tabbed out and you're throwing errors in my face. Stop that. But yes, you can do that. And if I pick a favorite movie, hit submit and hit an age, and there we go. And I'm just hitting Postman. But the code for this is fairly simple. I have a form field. I have my event handler with @submit. I got my vcloak in there. I'm writing my errors on top. In this case, I'm basically saying if I have any errors, just render them. And again, this was me deciding what I thought looked best for rendering errors. You could totally make this look nicer. And then I have V models for my 3 form fields. The code is incredibly short. Where literally, I just check if name and age exist. Yes, it would allow a string for an age. That's bad. I could fix that in here in a few seconds. I could also add logic to say if age was a negative value, that's bad as well. I would literally just keep adding more and more logic in here to handle what I need to do. That's one demo. And again, I feel like I did that a bit fast, but you have access to all this in that GitHub repo. You can clone and just play with it. The other thing that I do quite a bit is Ajax-based searching, where you take some user input, you hit some remote API, and then you render the responses. So my example is hitting a cool project called the Open Brewery database and Ajax search. So this will search breweries by name. I believe it's just American ones. So if I want to know, is there a brewery named after a cat? There is Big Cat Brewing Company. And I'm not sure if you saw, but it did render a loading screen. But it was just incredibly quick. So not a very complex application, but I think pretty common. If we go in here, so I have the div that represents my application. So I use the vcloak on it. I have one input field on top with a V model, and I have a button that's calling off to a search event. I have one paragraph that will iterate over the results. It only shows up when there's actually results to render. And I also have 2 divs that handle different states, either one for no results at all and one for searching. And again, that probably, like, I barely saw it, so I doubt y'all saw it on the stream. And the logic is literally just hitting their API. Unfortunately, their API got hit by a DDoS attack. And I found out this morning when I was hitting their API. So I switched to another one that worked pretty much the same way. By the way, I'm using Fetch for my Ajax calls. A lot of Vue people like Axios. I kind of like Axios, but I try to keep my demos to the fewest amount of libraries as possible. So I didn't want to include Axios as well. Fetch is baked into all modern browsers and works pretty easily, I think. So just kind of keep going along the Vue track. The next major aspect of Vue.js will be components. So you can like everything I've shown so far would probably cover like half of my career in terms of adding interactivity to pages. I've built a lot of small, simple stuff that needed a bit of JavaScript. I've not built things like Gmail very often at all. So Vue would have worked great for most of my life. Components certainly are what you start to use when you begin to build things that are a little bit more complex. Essentially, they allow you to take some layout, some particular logic, some particular style, and essentially package it up into one particular thing. It also solves a pretty interesting problem that HTML has. You may not even be aware that HTML actually has this problem, but there is no kitten tag. Now, I've known people on the standards boards for a while. I pushed for this. They always laugh at me when I do push for it. I think they're wrong, but I'm going to show you how we can fix this in Vue.js. So I begin by defining a component, and the way I'm showing here now, it actually gets a little bit simpler. You'll see later on, but I have a component. I have the template. That's the HTML that represents the component. In this case, it's just one image. And then I have the exact same stuff that I would have in a regular Vue application: data, computed values, methods, etc. The only thing new here are props, where I define for my new HTML tag what kind of props you're allowed to pass in. Vue components support doing things like required props. Required but must be numeric. Required must be numeric, must be positive. As complex as you want your property validation to be, Vue will allow you to do that. In my case, I was happy just setting straight defaults for a height and width value. Once I've defined that, I can then go into my HTML and just write kitten tags all day long. And I wish that was my job. By the way, the link at the bottom, the code pin was my old demo, a Nicolas Cage one. Nobody wants to see pictures of Nicolas Cage. Everybody wants to see kittens. So this is it. There's my kitten width, and this is pretty much the exact same thing you saw on screen here. So if I were to change that to, let's say, 399 and really big picture, we will see as CodePen reloads. Oh, yeah, okay. Don't let me stay here because I'll make kittens all day. So that's a simple example of a component. It definitely gets a bit more complex, and you can find a lot of components built out there. So for example, there's one for Google Static Maps. I keep forgetting to remove this because they're a competitor to my company, but I don't care. It's a good example. Bootstrap, if you know of Bootstrap, if you are design challenged like me, then there's a Bootstrap library. Vuetify is also another UI type framework. And I think the real power of components comes into the Bootstrap example. So I like Bootstrap, I've used it a lot, but I can never use Bootstrap without having the docs open right next to me. Because like they'll have like this cool tab control, but to use it, it's div class tab space tab dash primary space tab dash selected space tab dash it's Wednesday space tab dash whatever. And that's just the way it works. Whereas with the Vue components, it's bam, B dash tabs, B that tab. I can read that a heck of a lot more. And all this is doing is just wrapping all that crap for you. But I really, really appreciate it that's wrapping all that crap for me, because it makes me much more inclined to actually use it. So more component stuff, you could pass data in. You saw an example of that where I specified a height and width. You can listen for events from a component. You can have what are called sub-children, where basically I have some complex data I want to send into my component, and I want to write it in HTML, like you can see an example there. Components get really, really complex. I would say for most of us, we don't necessarily have to worry about that. It's more people building libraries like the Vue Bootstrap folks or the Vuetify folks who need that level of complexity. I do have an example in the GitHub repository where I created an image placeholder tag. In my case, I used placeholder.com, not placekitten. I apologize. And it accepts height and width. So I'll show you that. And placeholder. And yeah, not terribly exciting. There they are. And the code behind this. Here's the front end, and it's just calling, HTML tags that do not exist outside the scope of Vue.js. And this is the component. And again, if I wanted to, I could add more validation here. I can make it more complex. Placeholder.com also supports adding text to the placeholder images. And I could also very easily make that an attribute of my component tag so that I could go into the HTML and do something like, hold on, wrong file. I could easily add support for stuff like text equals, this is the banner ad that will annoy 99% of our users, but marketing insists, like so, pardon the typo. So I could easily add that as well. So again, I pretty much covered, I think, a lot of what would work for the simpler Vue use cases. And again, nothing wrong with the simpler Vue use cases. The page enhancement use case that I don't think gets quite enough attention out there in the Twitterverse and other places. But if you do decide that you are building a single page application, that you need a lot more control, that you're building something where the entire experience is going to be JavaScript driven, again, Vue.js supports you in that endeavor. There is a CLI. It is primarily a scaffolding tool. So it will set up all the files for you. Basically, if you did not want to use the CLI, you definitely could just do it by hand. If someone has already scaffolded an application on a GitHub repo, you can grab it from there and you don't need to use the CLI again to work with it. It is focused on single page applications. It has a couple other features as well, like prototyping that I just don't really get into. It has its own set of documentation and supports single file components, which is, I think, one of the cooler features of Vue.js, especially when you're working with applications where it allows you to write one file that represents a component, but use more of a native editing experience. So in this case, I have a template block and I have HTML. I have a script block for the logic for my component. And then I have a style block using scoped, which allows me to define CSS just for my one particular component. The tool set up by the CLI will handle all the fancy build process that I was disparaging earlier, but does serve its purpose. But it will handle compiling all this into magical JavaScript that will work in your browser. So to install it, you will use npm. Once you have it installed, then you have the Vue CLI and you could scaffold an application. Again, there's also a prototyping aspect that you can use as well, but I will show you real quick in my terminal. By the way, if you weren't aware, if you're on Windows, they have an open source terminal project that works really, really well. It supports command.exe, PowerShell. It also supports Windows Subsystem for Linux, which for me was my gateway back to Windows from Mac. I'm happy to talk about Windows Subsystem for Linux at a later time if you want, but I really, really like it. Not required for Vue.js at all, but I can go and say, and hopefully that's big enough, Vue create test live preso. And what the CLI will do was kind of walk me through a couple of options in terms of what I want to scaffold. I'm going to take the defaults, and then essentially it is going to start doing what it needs to do. So it's going to scaffold out stuff. It's going to create a package.json. It's going to do an npm install on it, download the entire internet. I will say, if you're watching this live, you're seeing the speed. Windows Subsystem for Linux was a little bit slow compared to a native Mac environment or a native Ubuntu environment. That has been fixed in recent Windows versions. My work laptop is locked down by IT, so I can't update quite as fast. But on my personal laptop, which is running the latest Windows, the latest Windows Subsystem for Linux, this whole process is easily 1/3 of the entire time. And this is also a one-time scaffold event, so I don't have to run this every single time. If I run npm run serve, this, oh, not in desktop, npm run serve. It's amazing how hard it is to type when people are watching you. It will do the magical build process and fire things up and give you a default Vue application with hot reload and stuff like that. If you go to localhost 8080, you can see. And I will show you, I'm going to wait a little bit. I'll show you more about what is scaffolded out when we look at the next demo. But a bunch of files everywhere. If you like a lot of files, you'll be happy with this. So that's a CLI. Again, scaffolding tool. It's what I would use to kind of start off a Vue.js application. Some of the more advanced features then that you would have available that you would consider using would be things like routing. So this is not a part of Vue. This is a separate library. So you have to grab another script tag or use npm to install it. And essentially is how you will map URLs to different components. It will support things like dynamic paths, any type of navigation that you can imagine in a particular application. The Vue router is how you will set it up. You will begin by defining a set of paths and saying, what component that they map to. You could take those paths, create an instance of a Vue router, and basically then just pass it to your Vue application. This kind of sets up the framework for saying, when I'm at /Vue, I want to execute or run a particular Vue component. The other parts that are kind of baked into this is the ability to do links. That's via router-link. This creates a simple anchor tag, but you can also use router links with buttons and other ways of navigation as well. And then router view is essentially where that component is run. So if you've ever seen a navigation where I have navigation on top, and then as I click stuff, the center page loads, it brings in content dynamically. Literally what you see on screen, that's the entire process. So when I click that first link, the Vue router will notice the URL changed. I'll say, oh, he's on /Foo, load up the Foo component and render it within router view. So I have a full example of this using a fairly typical main list of content with a detail page. So the first page will be my list. The second page will be the detail. And let me actually run this. And then I'll show the code. Main detail app, npm run serve. It does its thing. And again, by the way, this will be the first time as I edit files, this process will do the hot reloading for me. It won't need to rebuild everything. So if we go to back here and just reload, I should see this demo worked earlier, I promise. It's possible that this still has the old Star Wars API. So I wanted to show you what a full Vue application is. I intentionally added a bug so I'd have to come in here and show y'all what the code looks like. That's the only reason it's there. So in my source folder, I have my Vue application. There's a lot of files here, but what I will point out, I have a core app.vue. This is kind of the home. And you can see I'm using a router link. I'm using a router view. And then I have a Vue folders for my single page components. And that first one, it has my template, it has my script. If I wanted to, I could have a style here. That is the new link for the Star Wars API. So why that did not work, we will load DevTools, because that's what you do, right? So we'll reload, and I know they have core set up. Well, I am just at a loss. And by the way, again, my code does not have error handling here. I absolutely could have that in a Vue application, so it did something a bit nicer. I'm gonna look at this for like 5 seconds before I move on. Worst case, I can at least show you the code and you could imagine what was going on here, but this was going to load the films and then simply render them using router links. I'm passing a dynamic path because I want each film based on its ID value to go to a dynamic file. This case, film.view, where it was supposed to render the details for that particular Star Wars film. So it would have been, I think, 8 films total. I only have 2 components. The way I did that dynamic aspect in my router was right there. That colon ID essentially sets up a token or like a URL matching system to say anything /film/ whatever will map against that. You can get pretty complex. The router docs have an example of, I want to show a particular user. So it's user/ID. I want to show blog comments from a particular user. So that's hard-coded user/dynamic ID/comments/dynamic, value. If you want to get that complex, you absolutely could do that. And I apologize for that not working. Just want to look at it one more time. It's got to be a CORS issue for it to have absolutely nothing in there. Let's look at the console. CORS is disabled. Okay. Yeah, I could have sworn they had that working before. Oh, I reloaded and it worked. I fixed it. Not sure how, but I fixed it. Got to build my client for an hour. So, all right, I'm at the kind of root URL. I have my dynamic data. I click, please work. All right, it worked. It's probably impossible to see over stream, but that's film/1. I go home, I click Attack of the Clones, film/5, and it works. And again, you will have access to this GitHub repository example code that you can run and play with. You won't need to scaffold the application. You will need to run npmi to get the dependencies to work with it. So that's like one of the main things you typically do when working with a real Vue.js application. The other one is something called state management. This solves a problem you may not have. And I just pointed out because when I was learning Vue, and I was like, hey, let me learn all of Vue in like one day because I'm dumb. And that's what I try to do. I was looking at this particular thing and I hit a brick wall. And the reason I hit a brick wall is because the thing that I'm going to talk about is only applicable certain times. You don't need it all the time. And when I finally figured that out and kind of slowed down, it made it a bit easier to learn. So what this does is kind of solve the problem where you have a lot of components and it gets a bit harder to work with data. So if you have one component, like I had the image placeholder or the kitten component, if I wanted data to go back and forth, I could pass data in, I could listen for event handlers back out. As you begin to scale that, it gets a bit more complex. So I may have 2 layers of components where my cat component may have a kitten component underneath it, and they all need to share data. And when you have this like large family tree of components and they need to kind of share one set of data, it can get really complex managing events going back and forth and updating data. Luckily, we have a tool called Vuex. It's another library for Vue. Again, it's deeply integrated if you use it. It creates what it calls a store, which is basically just saying one set of data, one set of truth, essentially, for your application. Your components, they can all read from that store and they all get automatically updated when things change, but they can't change the store directly. Instead, they ask the store to update its information. And because all the components do that, you can have super complex nesting and all this stuff, and just know that when one thing changes data, every part of the application will have access to that. I had planned to have more on this slide. I gave a presentation just on Vuex about 2 weeks ago, and I forgot to get the recording URL from that organizer. I asked them yesterday, and for some reason they don't live on Twitter. How dare they? But eventually I will have that. If you go to my blog, I keep a playlist of my recordings, and you could check that if you want. But I do have like an hour-long presentation that you can watch where I go deep into Vuex. I want to end up talking about 3.0. This is just kind of high-level bullet points of what to expect. It is faster and smaller. because it's done by people much smarter than me, who will make it, X% faster and Y% smaller. Honestly, I don't care. I trust them. If they say it's faster and quicker, then I'm like, yeah, awesome. I just trust you on that. It'll add, going to the things that I do care about. And I apologize if I sound a bit distracted. I heard yelling downstairs, and it's one of those things where it's like, as a parent, you're like, okay, is that bad yelling or is it normal yelling? And you gotta do the kind of like logic gate in your head. And I'm mostly sure it's normal yelling. So I'm gonna keep going. If I want to do V-model with multiple properties, that's something that you can do. There's fallback support. There's a thing called suspense. Remember the demo where I had the Ajax loading screen and I said it was a bit too quick to see over the stream, where as I hit enter and I said I'm loading data, that went away and I rendered my information. Basically, Vue has a way of doing that a bit nicer via a feature it calls suspense. It also has the ability to actually update the DOM outside of its box. I kind of started off talking about Vue wants you to be in a box and work just in that box. Well, Vue 3 is like, I'm going to take you out of the box if you want to, and provide a way to work outside of it. It does have TypeScript support. Vue itself is entirely in TypeScript in 3.0. To be clear, this is optional. So if you don't like TypeScript and don't want to use it, don't worry about it. No need for a wrapper div in a template block. So if you work with single file components, you will write code like this. This is like the code I would write. And by the way, there is good Vue support in Visual Studio Code, and it's literally flagging an error for me that I'm ignoring because I do that, right? Vue will complain about this because it requires you to have one parent tag. So the way I fix it is, after I curse at myself for forgetting again, I go in and I add a blank div around it. And that's ugly, but it works. And Vue 3 basically says, yeah, don't worry about it. We got it. You're good. You don't have to add that crap around it. It adds a thing to fix it for you. There are changes to how you load stuff. I'm pretty sure coming up, I have a link to a good blog entry on the migration guide that somebody else wrote. The official Vue 3.0 docs that it's an RC also has a migration guide. It's not bad. I was a bit worried. I remember Angular 1 to Angular 2. Raise your hand if you have scars from that still. Yeah, it's not bad. I thought it was going to be worse, but it's not that bad. And a composition API, which got a lot of press because it was not announced the nicest way. When it first came out, a lot of people thought it was a new way of writing Vue code, and it's an optional way of writing code. And I could have warned the people on the Vue team about how to present things to developers in a non-scary way. But what do I know? I'm just old. Official repo at, again, Vue.js/Vue next. There are a couple of things that are going away. My second favorite feature of Vue is filters. I did not mention them at all, but if you hit up my blog and look at my Vue post, I use filters a lot. It's deprecated, it'll still work, but I decided to remove it from this presentation because it does have a end of life and a couple other things that I've rarely used, so I won't worry about them too much. If you want to learn more, my buddy Dan Vega, I've known him for a long time. He has a great video on Vue 3 where he goes more into the internal stuff. I say I don't care. I do care, but from a practical manner, a lot of those details, I'm fine with letting the smarter people know about it. If you do care about this, again, Dan does a great job of talking about it. That particular upgrade guide I'm linking to, I made this slide deck before I saw the RC docs. The RC docs also has a migration guide that you should look up. And that last link, this goes to a bunch of articles talking about Vue 3. A little bit more, almost done. So there is a DevTools extension. Honestly, I don't use it a lot. I use DevTools a heck of a lot. I only really think about the Vue DevTools extension when I'm doing an application and when I'm working with Vuex. It has really, really good support for Vuex, and I definitely recommend using it. Sarah Drasner has done a lot of really good stuff on Vue, especially on the transitions part. I'm not a fan of transitions. You know, like you click something and then it floats over and it lands here. Like my advice for transitions is, oh, you want to add a transition to your web page? Okay, add a transition. I want you to run that transition 1,000 times. Sit down, no water, nothing, run it 1,000 times. If you don't hate the entire planet after you've run it 1,000 times, keep it in. If you still think it makes sense after running it 1,000 times, keep it in. Vue has great support for adding that. And again, Sarah has some good articles on that. That's the last soapbox, I promise. I mean, I'm almost out of slides, so it has to be the last soapbox. There is a cookbook. I haven't seen it in the Vue 3 stuff. I hope they carry it over. But if you want to see good examples of how to do X in Vue.js, the docs have an example of that. There's 2 newsletters you could sign up for and get like a weekly list of links. They don't share the same content typically, so if you just want to kind of keep up on what's going on. And I also have a few articles on Vue.js. If you want to see some of my very impractical, not production ready demos on Vue, I have a lot of those. In fact, my last one was building random monsters, which is totally enterprise code. But if you want to learn some stuff about Vue.js, you can see my post as well. So you can do unit testing in Vue.js. Like I said, I just write perfect code. I mentioned transitions, custom directives, all that V- stuff. If you wanted to add your own, like V-kitten, Vue has a way of doing that. And again, there is a bit more. And with that, I'm going to look at the questions that I've gotten. Thank you, Suze, for typing them up for me in a nicely organized manner.
No worries.
And if I mispronounce any names, I'm going to blame the internet. I said it perfectly here, and while it streamed over the tubes, it messed things up. So Vanessa Nunez said, in my third demo, what if instead of arrays, you have objects? So my third demo, I assume was this, my V-4. So Suze, we have until 2 o'clock, right? 15 minutes or so?
Yes, and also Vanessa has just put, sorry, I meant strings instead of arrays. I'm referring to iteration item in items. What if each item is an object? But there is an example already.
Yes. Oh, there is? Okay. So,
Yeah.
so that one's done.
Looks that way, yeah.
Whoa, all right.
Well done.
All right. Is data a reserved keyword for any field where you want to use dynamic data in your HTML? So can you have a data field called data? All right, this was Andrea Asamoah. Are you saying, can you do this?
Andrea, if you just type in the chat and maybe we'll move on to the next question and come back to that one, perhaps.
Vanessa, again, does you...
Yeah, sorry, Andrea says yes, exactly. That is what she meant.
Let's see. I don't think it is, but yeah, it's not. I mean, I would probably not do that because data feels a bit vague. But like I said, we're human, right? So we name variables like this sometimes. So Vanessa asked, does Vue.js work with the virtual DOM like React? I honestly don't know for Vue 2, but I know for Vue 3, they've made changes to how that works. So even if I answered you for Vue 2, that's part of what has gotten rewritten for Vue 3. And actually, Dan Vega's video, if I remember right, he goes really deep into how the DOM is updated in Vue 3 and had a great example. So yes, I'm punting on that. I'm not sure how that translates to European audience. Basically, I'm kicking the question along to Dan Vega's video, which I'd recommend for a good look on that. Kat, love that first name. What's the difference between mounted and created? One is after the DOM is ready, and one's right before. Honestly, the link that I provided gets very precise into the differences there. I just use created as like a matter of habit. But yeah, I'm going to say when I need to know that, I go check the docs for a reference. And they actually have a pretty good flow chart that shows the whole process. I will actually say, you know, I said I only did created. There is also an error event as well that allows you to do like a catch-all error handler for Vue.js. If you go to my blog post, go to my blog tag on Vue.js, I did a long blog entry on where I tested that particular lifecycle event. Suzy Nakayama, when using Vue, do you usually leave the logic and the HTML together in the same file? So no, you know, for my demos, I mainly used CodePen. And for some of the examples in my GitHub repository and my blog, I will do everything in one HTML file. I know that's bad, but it's not optimized. But it also makes it, I think, easier for the reader to have one file to look at. Normally, I would have an HTML file. I'll have a separate JavaScript file. I would separate that stuff out. I wouldn't use a style block in my HTML file. I'd have a CSS file. Again, any bad practices that y'all saw today, blame on me. It's definitely not Vue forcing me to do bad things. So that hopefully that makes sense. Diane Jonker asks, is the event bus still a thing? I think that's part of what's being removed in Vue 3. It's not something that I've done in Vue. The only event type stuff I've done is listen for events from components, and it's just not something I've even done very often. I typically only use those events to listen for data changes, and when I started using Vuex more, it just ended up being something I use less. Eve is asking if Vuex can be considered similar to Redux for React.js. I believe if you go to the Vuex webpage, they say that, or they used to, I think somewhere on here, they mentioned, there we go. This is the basic idea behind Vuex, inspired by Flux, Redux, etc. Yeah, so when I first learned Vuex, that was actually, if I remember right, that was higher in the docs. And I was like, oh, cool, it's like Redux. What's Redux? So I'm kind of happy that it's much lower down on the page now. Hannah, when should a component be stored in the components folder versus when it should be in the views folder? So I apologize. I definitely did not spend very long on the different sets of folders in a Vue application. Typically, the views folder, let me stop saying it and actually show it. Main detail. So typically, your views folder represents one URL path. Doesn't have to be that way, but that's the way most people will do it. So my application had a home page, which I called home.vue, and had a film page where all the links would go into it. So typically, views equals one particular URL path, whereas components would be things that would be reusable logic. So in an e-commerce site with a checkout process, right, where page 1 is your address, page 2 is your billing address, page 3 is credit card information. If I wanted to render your shopping cart on each part of that process, I could use a component, shopping cart.view, that would handle rendering that and put that in each of the views. So any component where that represents UI or logic that I want to use in multiple views would go in the components folder. Absolutely, Hannah, hit me up if that doesn't make sense, because that kind of feels like something I could blog about to help explain a bit better. Ramian asked, is Webpack or any other bundler required to generate build? So the CLI, when it scaffolds, I am pretty sure it is using Webpack to handle it. I'm pretty sure it uses Webpack behind the scenes. I don't ever mess with that. I don't need to worry about that. I let the CLI handle all the bundling. Everything uses Webpack as far as I know, so it should be using Webpack as well. Oh, the last question's the best. Davina is asking how to select between React, Vue, and Angular for any project. The best framework is the one that makes you most productive, the one that you feel that you can get stuff done in. And whenever I say you, I mean you and your team if you work with multiple people. So whatever you like, whatever makes you feel like, oh, I can kick butt with this framework, that's the one you should do. That's the one that you should work with. React and Vue and Angular, they all do the same thing. They let you build applications. They all have pretty much the same set of features, not the exact same, but if I wanted to rebuild Gmail, I know that I could do it in Vue. I know I could do it in React. I know I could do it in Angular as well. At the end of the day, which one would I be excited about using? For me, it's Vue because it matches the way I think. It matches the way I like to build. It makes me happy. So to me, Vue is the best answer. And that may be something totally different for other people out there. And that's the last one.
It is the last question. Wow, that was a bumper crop of questions there. And when you said, Kat, that's a great name, I agree, that's a great name. But in a strange twist of fate, turns out Kat's got a dog.
Oh,
Dog
I have a dog too. It's okay.
during the talk. So I'm now thinking, is the dog named after another animal, like horse or goat or something like that? I don't know. I think we need to find that out. But yeah, thanks so much, Raymond, for coming and giving us that intro to Vue.js. And you're kind of a victim of your own success here, because now I know you've got a Vuex talk. I think I'm going to be inviting you back. So anyone here who wants to know more about Vuex, please hit me up and let me know if there's a demand for it. Then I will certainly put that request into Raymond. But yeah, thanks so much for giving up your time today. Well, you still got the rest of the afternoon over there, haven't you?
Yes.
Yeah, so right. But yeah, and thanks to everybody for coming tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. If you do create a project using Vue, we would love to see it. So make sure you tweet about it if you are on Twitter, because like Ray says, like everybody's on Twitter, right? Make sure you tag both of us and we will definitely check those out. You can find out about more Women Who Code London events by going on meetup.com, where you signed up for this one. But until then, look after yourselves and have a great day. Thanks, everybody. Bye.